Hi there, welcome to Floating in Books. Today's video is going to be all about some unlikable characters that I like. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. On this channel, I come once a week to chat to you about books and fashion. And today I have another bookish video again. And today I thought we could chat about some unlikable characters. I personally like a character that you're not supposed to like, mainly because they usually have some like warped morality or like they're morally gray characters, and I feel that they add the spunk to a story that I sometimes miss, especially in YA, that is missing. Like, it's very clear cut, good versus bad, and I love it if characters are sort of like towing that line and maybe get away with it or maybe don't get away with it. So I definitely have some, like a selection here of you know, morally gray characters, or like characters that don't always do the right thing. And I personally really like that. I know it's not for everyone, so if you want your very clear-cut characters, then this is not the video for you, but these are 10 recommendations that you can get stuck into if you do like that sort of thing. So for me, when it comes to unlikable characters, one of my favorite type of unlikable character is the unreliable narrator. And I think a story that does that best is this. This is Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. And American Psycho is not for the faint of heart. This book is gruesome. When I read it, I had to read it during the day. I could not read this right before going to bed because it would give me nightmares. There are some horrific scenes in here to the point where I'm afraid to watch the movie with Christian Bale. So I've never watched that. So if you did watch it, and you've read the book as well, is the movie as gruesome as the book is? Because this is not for the faint of heart. So in case you don't know what this book is about ooh, what's his name again? Patrick Bateman. And he has like a flashy job, he's quite rich, and he is a psycho. And he tells you all about his like just psycho killer tendencies, and you get a glimpse of his brain as we go along. However, as we go through the story, things become wackier and wackier, and there do not seem to be any repercussions to his actions. I mean, he's actively talking about killing people and how he goes about it. So that's why I say it's quite gruesome. And there are some scenes in here that are just absolutely dreadful. But towards the end of the story, we definitely get some hints that maybe, is this real? Is this really happening? Is it not? And just because, you know, he has these really terrible thoughts, he is definitely an unlikable character. What makes this story really good is that it's definitely sort of like a deep dive into like the dark crevices of people's minds and what goes on in them, and sort of like exaggerate it to a point where it's like, what if this, you know, these like dark thoughts that people might have, and sort of blowing it out of proportion. At least that's the way I've read it. I'm not sure if that's the way you're supposed to read into it. But I definitely think that this is a great example of an unlikable character. If you like someone who's a jerk and who revels in being a jerk, this is for you. I think it doesn't get any more classic than Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. I mean, if you want characters that do anything that's wrong under the sun, who are high all the time, this is just an acid trip in book form. That's the only way I can describe it. I did read it years ago. Mine is very discolored because someone thought it was fun to make this a bright orange cover. And this is, again, it's a bit of a weird one, which is another reason why I don't think this is for everyone. Not just because of the subject matter of a lot of drugs and a lot of like just people. I remember there's this whole stretch where they're just in a motel room doing drugs the entire time, doing absolutely nothing. So it's quite a pointless book as well. And there's this hint of this like all being real, which to an extent it was. But this is just, if you want a very wacky read, then this is a good one. One of my all-time favorite books is Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. Now, I believe that the author is a bit questionable. I don't know. I hear some people saying some things from time to time about authors who are canceled, and she's on that list apparently as well. But this is a like Southern Gothic fiction kind of story. At least that's how I had to read it when I was in college. This was on my American Gothic reading list. And this is just, again, if you want an unlikable character to you just want to wring his neck the entire time, let me introduce you to Hazel Motes. Hazel Motes is, I believe he's a veteran, comes back to the South in the United States, doesn't really know what to do with his life, and he somehow ends up making this religion. It's all about, like, everything to him is phony, but because of him commenting on everything that is phony, he ends up being phony himself. It's just, I don't know. It's, again, a character study, more so a bit like Bret, Easton, Ellis, where it's like this exaggeration of the human condition, more so than anything else. It's not necessarily dark and twisted in a creepy kind of way, but it's dark and twisted in a psychological kind of way. Something a little bit more lighthearted is the Strings of Murder series by Oscar de Muriel. I have not yet read the final book in the series, but this is the Frey and McGray series. This is set in 19th century Edinburgh, and every single story features like a magical occurrence that can then be explained by Victorian scientific discoveries of the time. So there's a lot of research that goes into these books by the author for sure. But the two main characters, Frey and McGray, meet each other after Frey has to be transported from London to Edinburgh because something his brother did. I don't remember. He's somehow fallen out of favor and he has to move to Edinburgh, and he's stuck with McGray, who has a basement office because he is the whack job of the entire Edinburgh police force, because he believes in all of these like magical things and weird things that have been happening. And especially McGray isn't exactly an easy colleague to Frey. Not just at the start, but throughout their entire book series where we meet these two characters. McGray isn't just necessarily crazy, he just really knows what he wants, and he knows he can get away with it, which makes him insufferable to an extent as well. But Frey himself isn't, like, you know, just a pretty schoolboy, even though that's exactly what McGray kind of calls him the entire time. Frey himself is also struggling with his parents. Like, he's pretty well off, but he wants to, like, be his own man, and he's struggling with that. So both of these characters definitely make some choices that they also have to make, and I think that that makes them a little bit more morally gray, rather than straight up jerks. Ooh, my books are falling from my lap. Rather than like the straight up jerks that we see in the other stories I've referenced so far, these two characters are more so like morally gray, where they just have to take some really difficult choices as the story continues. Next up is by Gaslight by Stephen Price, and this is also an historical fiction story. The other one was more like detective based. This one is too, but this is about an American Pinkerton agency detective who ends up in London and has to solve some murders there. It's set in this very gloomy, you don't know what's coming around you around the corner kind of Victorian London because of all the mists and the gloomy and the darkness. But our main character, I don't remember his name, of course. William Pinkerton, actually. And he, again, he's quite set in his ways. He has ways he wants to get things done, which in England doesn't always work because he's American and he sort of runs into problems because of that. But he also isn't, again, an easy character. He's this loner who's like roaming the streets trying to solve these murders. So he's not always like the best point of view to get things from. But he ends up being like this clever man who solves everything, of course. So yeah, but if you, again, like some morally gray characters, then this is a good one. I think the worst of the worst is probably the main character in John Niven's Kill Your Friends. This is about Stephen Stelfox, and Stephen Stelfox is a music company, A&R. That's what he works in. So he's like doing the artist management for a record company in the 90s when the music industry was booming and you could get away with pretty much everything. And that's pretty much what he believes. He is cutthroat. And let's just say you should take the title here literally. He is just an incredibly nasty piece of work. And that's why he definitely has to go onto the list of unlikable characters. But like I mentioned, I like an unlikable character, and that's why I enjoyed this book. It's also very witty. Another sort of like original story when it comes to unlikable characters is Martin Amos's Money. This is about John Self. And he is, again, like this high roller who thinks he can get away with everything. But then in the end of this story, there's a nice little twist that a lot of the other unlikable character books that I'm referencing today doesn't have. So this book is pretty much about the corruption that money can cause in people. And John Self is sort of like used as his, like this example of what can happen if people only do things for the money. Another unlikable character is in Cosmopolis by Don DeLillo. This is a story that I actually read because Robert Pattinson was going to be in the movie. But this is, again, about one of these like high roller, unlikable kind of dudes who just is far too rich beyond his means. Like, he's got more money than he truly needs. And he decides to, pretty much over the course of a limo ride, squander everything away that he has. And it turns into this almost Western kind of standoff at the end, because there's this like ex-employee from his company that's like haunting him, and it's, again, there's this whole like allegory that you can read into this, but there's also a couple of very absurd things in it as well. The movie ended up being quite absurd as well. It's not one that I recommend if you're just used to your blockbuster movies. But this was it was a good read. Again, as far as unlikable characters go, and again, as far as unlikable characters go, this is definitely one of my favorites. Number 9, Jim Butcher's Stormfront, and then especially the main character, Harry Dresden. This is a book that a lot of people vilify for the fact that it has bad female representation and whatnot. And that's because the main character is a bit of an ass. I mean, I don't think we're supposed to like Harry Dresden. He's supposed to be this morally gray, run-down wizard who is like the only wizard of his kind who's trying to make a living as a private detective, but then for weird stuff. And he's just not really doing very well. He has a car that breaks down the entire time. Like, he's pretty beat down, and he's just not really caring all that much about himself. And he sort of gives off that sort of vibe, like that vibe throughout the first couple of books of this story. Now, I have heard that this story does change quite a bit. It's one of the longest running fantasy stories of all time. I believe there are like 25 books in this series alone. I've only read like the first 3 or so. And I really liked it because, again, I like those morally gray characters who say things that shouldn't be said and have really dark humor. And that's in this as well. So that's why I did end up liking Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. And finally, Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I think any story that has like a group of criminals that go and do a heist is going to have some morally gray characters in it. But this is more at a YA level, so it's kind of clear and cut. So again, if you're someone who wants to explore unlikable characters, but those two things are, like the things I've mentioned before, are a bit too much, then this can be really nice. So Kaz Brekker and his crew are all struggling with their own problems along the way in this duology. And in the first book of the duology, they end up planning this heist. And again, they are thinking they are doing the right thing, but are they just in it for the financial gain? And there are a lot of repercussions of what's happening in the first book that are explained in the second book. So in the second book, the story sort of continues as they've just come back, and then everything was just not the way it seemed in the first book, so it wasn't as straightforward as they had planned. So this book is a really nice one. Again, a whole cast of morally gray characters in this one. Like, you don't just get one, you get a little bit of everyone, and that's definitely, again, something that appealed to me. This is my favorite book in the entire Grisha trilogy, so because the series was just released on Netflix, the second season of Shadow and Bone, and in that series they do fuse the original Grisha trilogy and this together in one story. So we already meet the crew in the very first season, even though, you know, the books were published a little bit separately, and you don't really get a lot of Grisha in this one. It's more like just criminals who plan a heist, and I love that. So that's it. Those were the 10 unlikable or books with an unlikable character that I personally do really like. If you don't like things that are really dark and, like I said, dark humor, if you don't have a dark sense of humor, these may not be for you. Like, this entire video just comes with a trigger warning because this is not for everyone. And if you read into it too much, or if if you just feel like books are stepping on your toes quite easily, don't read any of these. I don't think so. I don't think you should. Maybe the Six of Crows one and the Frey and McGray one. Those are the only ones that are like safe for everyone. Everything else, grain of salt. Keep your wits about you, and don't take it too personally. That's all I can say. So I would like to invite you to leave your favorite unlikable characters in the description box down below for sure. And then I will be back again next week with another, hopefully bookish video again, because I wanted to do a lot of bookish videos this month, because last month I was focusing on my wardrobe declutter a lot, and then we can do just the tail end of my wardrobe declutter in May, and then hopefully we can get some more bookish videos done. So yeah, thank you so very much for joining me today. Thumbs up this video if you liked it. See you next week. Bye-bye.